The NFL is an ever-evolving league, and the game of football itself is an ever-evolving sport, with nothing in the game staying the same for too long, as every team and every player and every coach tries to find the competitive advantage that sets them apart from the rest. Over the past decade or so, that has only become more clear, as the passing aspect of football has led to the evolution of the sport and the game itself over and over, with record breaking numbers being put up, record breaking scores being put up, and position evolution like we've never seen. Safeties becoming linebackers, linebackers becoming edge rushers. But something changed, something different happened this last season. It was as if we hit the rewind button. It was as if football itself reset to the ground and pound sport that it has always been known as, where physicality became the true motivator in the game and the deciding factor in who would win and who would lose. Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video, or in this case, the first video of Breaker Sports. If you guys have been with the channel for a little while, obviously there's been a rebrand. I go over all of that in my last video, so please feel free to go check the description there. But without further ado, let's jump right into things here today, and we're going to be talking about none other than the 2025-2026 NFL season and how last season could impact this season in such a significant way, because obviously last season was a crazy season for the NFL. Not only did we have teams that should have been like 1 or 2 seeds based on records playing in wild card games, but we also thought we were going to see probably the dumbest three-peat in NFL history, which would have been the first three-peat in NFL history at that, with the Kansas City Chiefs, who pretty much spent the entire first part of the season, well, I'm not going to say getting handed wins, but it's pretty close to that, right? Last season was insane. Obviously, it ends with the Eagles and their historical run through Saquon to go win it all, but plenty and plenty of other stuff happened in that. And so before we dive into what I think could happen this season and how I think some of the big changes and kind of storylines and patterns that we saw last season could truly affect what could happen this season and where the direction of the league is going right now, along with some teams I think that are going to be some sleepers and some other stuff, obviously. But the run game and defense are really what came back last season. It was very prevalent, and I think the easiest team to look at is the Chiefs in this category, or you could look at the Commanders, a very surprising team in the NFC that goes to the NFC Championship after having the number 2 pick the year prior. And what was the common thing in both of those teams? Well, I would say it's the run game and the defense. The Chiefs were coveted as one of the best defenses in the league the entire season, and their passing game wasn't the same, right? Their number 1 guy in Travis Kelce did not play like the best tight end in the league last year, but they still found themselves in the Super Bowl. And how was that? They had a good run game, they had a very good defense, and on the other side of things, when you look at the Commanders, they're a team that was literally sitting there before they get Dan Quinn, before they draft Jaden Daniels, as the laughingstock of the league, a team where poop is falling out of the stadium, a team where nobody wants to play, no fans want to go to watch, and all of a sudden they are competing to try and go to the championship, right? Competing to try and go win a Super Bowl. It was crazy. And how did that happen? Well, obviously you lucked into Jaden Daniels, who is one of the best rookie quarterbacks we've seen in a very long time. At the same time, you also see another one of the best rookie quarterbacks that we've seen in a long time in Bo Nix on the other side of the conference, and those two go back and forth and compete for Rookie of the Year throughout the season. Jaden Daniels ends up taking it home and leading his team through the playoffs. And I think a big part of that was the fact that you had Brian Robinson, you had Austin Eckler, you had a set run game that was able to consistently help him with dump offs, help him in short yardage gain stuff, and he was a mobile quarterback, probably the second best mobile quarterback in the NFL right now. I would put only behind Lamar Jackson. Now you could argue Josh Allen is going to be ahead of him, and honestly, I might not disagree. I might actually put him third, because Josh Allen, it's like he's like the Derrick Henry running style at quarterback. It's just something that's it's alien-like, right? But then you have Dan Quinn that transforms this defense. He takes what he was able to do with the Cowboys. The Cowboys completely fall off on the defensive side of the ball. They can't stop the run. And all of a sudden, this Commanders defense is one of the best in the league. And I think over the last couple of years, you've really seen how much defense impacts things. Just back to the example that we were talking about with the Broncos. Yes, Bo Nix had a solid rookie year. He was competing with Jaden Daniels for Offensive Rookie of the Year for a large part of the season. But what was the main thing that the Broncos had? The Defensive Player of the Year at cornerback. That not only is it very rare that a cornerback wins Defensive Player of the Year, but to win it in the fashion that PS2 did was insane. And then you look at how Vance Joseph was able to develop a scheme and turn guys that were third round picks like Nick Benito into also Defensive Player of the Year conversation level players. I think another team that is huge in this obviously is the Philadelphia Eagles. It's the reason they won the Super Bowl. Their offense was fantastic. They had Saquon, who had a historical season at the running back position. They have weapons. They have Jalen Hurts. They have an offensive line. We all know what the Eagles have. But the number one thing they had was defense. They had youth at the positions that they needed, and they had power at the line. They had size up front in the trenches. And it's something that the league had gone away from, I would say, over the past, I think within the past 3 years, we've seen a shift back to the importance of the trenches. But prior to that, kind of for about 10 years, the league slowly got smaller and smaller, like I was talking about in the intro, at multiple positions, prioritizing speed, prioritizing space, something very similar that a lot of other sports have seen happen with more of an analytical perspective once that's really been driven home kind of since the turn of the 21st century, where you've seen analytics really dive into a lot of sports. You saw major change in baseball with the analytics and how it's basically home run or nothing in baseball. You saw major change in basketball with the amount of three-pointers that are shot now. And you saw major change in the NFL where it was all about speed and how quickly we can score and that type of thing. But it seems to have kind of pulled back. It seems to, because when the pendulum swings so far one way, it's bound to come back the other way. And that's exactly what I think we're seeing in today's NFL. And the Eagles were able to take advantage of that. They basically took the rotation of the Georgia lineup on the defensive line that was able to go win a national championship in college a few years back, put that in the NFL, and all these guys that were the best player at their position and were having to sit behind even better guys in college, they are going to be good in the NFL. They're massive human beings that are just crushing it at that specific job that they have to do, whether it's run stop, whether it's forcing pressure, and they had a constant rotation. But I think beyond that, you can look at a lot of other teams that weren't necessarily winning the Super Bowl or going to the Super Bowl or even going to the NFC Championship like we were just talking about. But I think when you look over at Minnesota, this is another team that's a prime example of how defense has become so important. You have a guy in Kevin O'Connell who has been a quarterback master since he's gotten there. He's gotten the most that he can out of every quarterback that has stepped foot on that field. It's why a lot of people think that their rookie in JJ McCarthy is going to be able to potentially do better than what Sam Darnold did last year, and he ended up going 14-3 with that team. I think a lot of that is credit to Kevin O'Connell. But when you look on the defensive side of the ball, who do they have? They have Brian Flores. They have a guy that has mastered the blitz technique. And obviously, defenses change and defensive schemes change over time. I think the biggest one that people think back to is the Seahawks of the mid 2010s, right? When they obviously go and win Super Bowls and whatnot, and their cover 3 reliance. Well, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, they're a team that heavily relies on blitzing, and they make the most out of it. I mean, it was a team with beat down players, with guys that shouldn't have been as good, and guess what? They were a phenomenal defense and nearly ended up being the number 1 seed in the NFC, going down to the final game of the regular season. It was number 1 seed or number 5 seed. I mean, one of the craziest scenarios that we've seen probably, in the history of the NFL. But yeah, I think it's super easy to see how much just the aspect of the physicality has come back, because if you can't be physical, if you can't stop some of these running backs that are in the league right now, then you are going to give up more yards over time and you're going to lose the game. You're going to lose time of possession, which we know is a massive stat when it comes to the game of football, and you're going to get injuries, you're going to get wear and tear, you're going to get exhaustion on your defense if you can't stop them, which only makes it harder for your offense. And if their defense is built to stop what the league went towards, which was the very pass heavy style of the game, well, defenses have constantly gotten better at that. I mean, quarters and cover four have become super prevalent. Shell, that the Fangio schemes to stop that. And because most teams are very familiar with that type of concept, it almost felt like falling behind this last season wasn't as easy as it was, especially, I mean, I think the Chiefs, again, is a great example in this. A few years ago, the Chiefs could be down multiple scores, and it wouldn't matter because you would know Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill were going to go score 3 80-yard bombs, right? And that was just how it was going to go for you. But it hasn't been that the last few years. I think when you look at how good Saquon's been, when you look at how good Derrick Henry is at the age that he is, when you look at the fact that Christian McCaffrey probably should have been the MVP 2 years ago, and was just off the field this last season, and you look at the detriment that had to the 49ers roster, a team that was, again, coveted as one of the best defenses in the league. They have an injury to their running back and a little bit of a lackluster receiver room, and all of a sudden this team is nowhere near being a contender, let alone they're not even close to being a playoff team or winning their division, which was one of the weakest divisions in football last year, just off of record. They had the lowest division winner, or tied for the lowest division winner at 10-7, which went to the Rams, and they could only get 6 games in that division. A division that included Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know who thought they were going to be in the Super Bowl, and Kyler Murray trying to rebuild the Arizona Cardinals, who just had the number 4 pick, and they couldn't be better than that team. So, I mean, when you look at it that way, I think it really puts a precedent on how much the run game has really come back. Again, I mean, we could look at the Lions, their 2-back system, and how efficient they've been with that, and how we think Ben Johnson could go over to the Bears and kind of emulate some of that this next season. But I think last season was just a very telling sign for how the pendulum swung so far in one direction, which was passing, that it's coming back. And being a beefier O-line, being willing to just take 3-4 yards at a time, has kind of become a big advantage for teams, because it allows you to be able to break those big plays. And obviously, I mean, this is simple football. If you can run the football, you can run play action. If you can run play action, you can get big plays. If you can run the football, that opens up more down the field, even if you just go to the pass. This is simple stuff. But because teams had leaned so heavily into the pass game, you've seen such a decline in the run defense that has allowed for other teams to really take advantage of that. And yeah, I think last season was just a super interesting season as it goes for just the evolution of football. I'm interested to see how much of that, I don't know necessarily the term I want to put on it, but like the beefy style of football, how prevalent that's going to be this season, as I think more teams kind of caught on to how important that is. I think a team that really leaned with the pendulum into the passing style, that it hasn't worked out for them, is the Miami Dolphins, right? They're a team that was, all right, we're going to have a tight end that's basically a slot receiver in Jonnu Smith. We're going to have Tyreek Hill. We're going to have Jalen Waddle, both guys that are under 6 foot that are going to run super fast. We're going to have Tua, a guy that can get the ball out super quick, and we're not going to invest in the O-line or the running back room that much. Obviously, they got super lucky with A-Chain, but again, a small back. I mean, A-Chain's what, somewhere between like 5'7" and 5'9". He's more of a receiving speed back, and they were only able to go 8-9 last year. Obviously, the injuries and everything, we know how prevalent that is throughout football, but they were only able to go 8-9. When you look at Cincinnati, a team that relied heavily on the passing pendulum, well, you have Joe Burrow, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You have Jamar Chase, probably the best receiver in the league, and then you have T. Higgins, who also is a top receiver in the league. but you have no O-line. They kind of had to switch. They had like more of a passing back in Chase Brown, right? Shifting away from Joe Mixon, who I think offered a little bit more of both of the styles, right? And when they let him go to the Texans, they end up going in 9-8. Again, their team is, they start the season awfully every year. That's really their problem, but we all know that. But both of those teams are examples of teams that swung so far with the pendulum into the passing game that it's hurting them now because they don't have the other aspect of their game as much. And I think the O-line is the big thing here that you're seeing there, is you invest so much into these skill positions that you're not able to get some of the consistent yardage, and you give up sacks, you give up loss of yardage on runs, and you give up the football in cases where maybe you shouldn't, right? I mean, Joe Burrow, if I remember the stats correctly, would have probably been an MVP candidate last year had this team been able to win more than 9 games. But they weren't even able to make the playoffs, right? They were third in their division. And that's basically last in a division that has the Cleveland Browns in it. So, I don't know. I just think it's super interesting to see all the teams that had the success of building through the trenches when that became such a almost controversial way to build a team a few years ago. I think it's a big reason that a guy like Howie Roseman has gotten so much praise, because everybody looks at this roster and goes, how does he keep getting people? Because not only are the Eagles a prime example of a team that builds strictly through the trenches, they will draft offensive line 2 or 3 years before they need it. They'll do the same thing with defensive line. It's how they ended up with the rotation they had on defense last year. But then he still makes the big moves for skill position guys and goes out and drafts Smith in the first round, and then goes and trades and signs A.J. Brown in free agency and signs Saquon Barkley in free agency. Obviously he gets a lot of praise for a good reason, and it's because he was able to stick to building to the trenches and still pull that advantage of the passing, like the overpassing usage of football, and find really high caliber skill guys whilst having a good core constantly of the kind of meat of the team, if you want to call it that, the trench players, the linebackers, the backup running backs, like that type of thing. So I'm super interested in this next season. Obviously I said I would give kind of some predictions. If I had to go division winners for every division in the AFC East, I think that the Buffalo Bills are obviously going to go win that division again. I don't see a decline from the Bills. If anything, I at least see a stagnant type of very similar type of season to what they had last year. When we look at the AFC North, I again think Baltimore should be able to take that home. You see Pittsburgh, who has a lot of question marks. Pittsburgh could be very, very good, could be very, very bad. They've had a decent amount of turnover over the offseason, and obviously a lot is relying on a very old Aaron Rodgers, who hasn't been good in a couple years, to kind of lead that team any further if you think that they would win it. So I think, again, you're going to see Buffalo win it, a team that has leaned into the trenches style of play, right? You have a guy like James Cook, who is one of your best players at running back. Obviously, Josh Allen is a running type of quarterback. You've invested heavily in the offensive line, and they've tried to kind of rebuild some of that defensive line that they've struggled with as well. Baltimore, enough said, they are probably the best running team in all of football. And then I think we'll leave the AFC South for a minute, because I think that's where things get super interesting in the AFC. And then when you look at the AFC West, I will give it to the Chiefs again. Obviously, they went 15-2. They went to the Super Bowl. But I'm just going to put a little asterisk. The Broncos are coming for them. I'm obviously biased, but the Broncos are coming from them. To go 10-7 last season with the rocky start that they had with the rookie quarterback, and to only build on that defensively and offensively when they might have had the best defense in the league last year, I don't know. I'm just saying, there's a real chance that this is a year that Kansas City doesn't win their own division. I'm not saying they couldn't go win the Super Bowl, because obviously they're stacked and they are kind of the NFL's favorite. But just saying, don't discount the Broncos there. And obviously the Chargers, I think, will probably be a playoff team as well under Jim Harbaugh, who's, again, back to this kind of concept of the evolution of football, really leaned into the trenches and building it the old way, if you want to call it that way. Then I think you go over to the NFC. I don't see Philly falling off, and I do see Washington continue to compete, but maybe you see a year two quarterback slump from Jaden Daniels. I would be very surprised based on how he played in the playoffs, but that team did over exceed expectations off of talent as well, and maybe they kind of end in a similar boat, but with less of kind of a hot start to the season. Then I would go over to the NFC North, and based off of today, where one of the craziest trades that I think has ever happened, I mean, rest in peace to the city of Dallas when it comes to sports. Obviously, they got Cooper Flagg, who was the number one overall pick in the NBA draft, and they got the number one pick in the WNBA draft. But to trade Luka at 26 years old, and then to trade Micah Parsons at 26 years old, like 6 months apart from each other, the two cornerstones of sports for that city, two of the best players in their respective sports. And I mean, Dallas traded Micah Parsons for what, less than the Niners traded to get Trey Lance, I think, when they went and drafted him number 3 overall. So, I mean, it was definitely a decision by Dallas. But I do think there's a real good chance that Green Bay competes with Detroit for the division title there, with the loss of the coordinators from Detroit. And I would actually probably say Green Bay, with the addition of Micah Parsons, is probably going to win that division, as I do see a regression from Minnesota and Detroit. Minnesota more so. And I really don't know where to kind of pin my finger for Chicago. I could see slight improvement from them, though. Again, I'm going to leave the South Division for the NFC as well, and we will come back to that, as I think things get pretty interesting there. And then when we look at the NFC West, this is a division that should probably be run by the Niners, but it isn't. And I think that Arizona has had very good improvement. I don't think this is going to be Seattle's year. I think this will be a slight step back for Seattle to kind of regroup and figure out their quarterback situation going forward. And I expect Darnold to not be as good as he was last year in Minnesota. So I really think this comes to a two-team race between the Rams and between the Arizona Cardinals, in which I am going to lean to the Rams by, I mean, it could be a tie game scenario, kind of like last year, where they're both 10-7, and the Rams get it over kind of a head-to-head type of thing. The one thing there is I think the Rams are a little bit more injury-prone, but the addition of Devontae Adams and such, I do think kind of rejuvenates this offense, if that's kind of the right way to put it. And I would say, due to the experience, they're just going to be maybe a half step ahead of the Cardinals, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see the Cardinals in the playoffs this year. And then we'll hit the NFC South before we hit the AFC South. The renowned worst division in all of football. The division that many teams, many fans were saying didn't even deserve a playoff team last year. I don't see much improvement for this division this year, to be honest. I think Tampa, again, will be pretty solid. I think their receiving core has only improved with their additions through the draft, and I do think that they could maybe go get an extra win or two this season. But, I mean, when you look at the bottom of this division, New Orleans is probably going to go have the number 1 pick in this year's draft. Carolina, though Bryce Young did show a little bit more after his benching, and he was able to kind of come back in and not be the absolute worst quarterback in all of football. And obviously the addition of Tetro McMillan and such, that could help them maybe be around the same range, get another win or so. But I do think they're going to be another kind of bottom of the league season for them. And then Atlanta is where it gets really interesting, because if Atlanta is at their absolute peak, then they're winning the division and they're probably like the 3 seed in the NFC. But if Penix isn't at the peak of what he could be, and I mean, this is basically the Kyle Pitts conversation. Like, Atlanta is Kyle Pitts. If Kyle Pitts is as good as he could be, then Atlanta wins the Super Bowl at that point. But obviously we know that'll never happen. I mean, if you play fantasy football, you know that 10 times over, especially if you've ever drafted him. No, I do think Atlanta, they have a chance to kind of take another step. You have year 2 of Penix. Obviously, he sat behind Kirk for a little bit last year, was able to come in, kind of rocky. I think the thing that holds them back, though, is their coach. So I do see that division falling nearly the same as it did the last year. with very little improvement out of most teams. Maybe Atlanta goes 9-8 instead of 8-9 this year, though, if I were looking from a realistic standpoint, even though I do like Penix as a quarterback and did like him coming out of college. And then the most interesting division to pick a winner, in my opinion, for this upcoming season is the AFC South. Obviously, you have the Houston Texans, who won it the last couple years with CJ Stroud, a team that really disappointed when it came to the playoffs, and a team that I kind of felt was going to be the next up team, like the next team to kind of jump into that true contender tier. I mean, just when you look at the AFC over the last like 5 years, it's been KC, Buffalo, and Baltimore. Those have been like the true contender teams in the AFC, and I thought Houston was going to kind of rival that coming out of the South with CJ Stroud, with the weapons they put around them, with the defense that they had built, and they kind of fell a little bit flat last year. I don't think Indy's going to be very good. I mean, when you're losing a competition to Daniel Jones, the guy that you had last year, and now you're starting Daniel Jones, I don't think that leads for a lot of success from Indy. Just go ask the New York Giants, who, well, they might actually be in a worse quarterback situation, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones, I don't think is leading Indy to do a lot, and I think the team has regressed from the point a few years ago where it was like, okay, this team's a quarterback away. If they never had lost luck, then they would be a contender. It's not the same team anymore. I think the team has regressed. They do have good skill players, but a lot of their guys are getting older, and you're starting to see more holes build up within the Colts, I would say. And then the Tennessee Titans, they obviously take Cam Ward number one. I think Cam Ward is going to have a solid rookie season. I do expect some ups and downs, so they're not going to be winning this division either. So it really comes down to Houston or Jacksonville. And the reason I say Houston or Jacksonville is because, similar to the Falcons argument, and we might need to have a separate conversation about Trevor Lawrence if the Jaguars can't win more than 4 games this season, because the addition of Travis Hunter, along with how good Brian Thomas was last year, you hopefully have a better run game than what they had last year, because they were basically one of the worst running teams in football last year with Etienne and Bigsby. So you hope that it's not worse than it was last year, even though the running back room hasn't seen a ton of turnover. And the defense continues to look like it's getting better player-wise. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trevor Lawrence is at all who we thought he was supposed to be coming out of college, that this team really gives Houston a run for the money in this division. And if Houston plays like they did last year, I think Jacksonville is going to win the division. But I do think Houston, without Diggs there, with hopefully a little bit better injury luck, does lock down the division, but isn't quite in that contender tier like we were thinking maybe a year or two ago, or especially I was thinking. Yeah, I think that's going to kind of do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. What do you guys think is going to be the surprise change of this season, or kind of, I mean, you could even just say the player who you think is going to just elevate himself above what a lot of people thought? Obviously, I think Saquon was a pretty easy pick last year, going from one of the worst offensive lines in New York to probably the best offensive line in the league, a team that had other pieces around him, and it kind of set up perfectly for him to be that guy the year prior. You could say the same thing for McCaffrey, going to a team that had all the weapons, had all the defense, and he was able to be that kind of final puzzle piece. So we've seen running backs the last couple of years be able to almost take over the league off of being that kind of final piece added to a team. But as there's not really a team that kind of had that happen over the offseason, who do you think is going to be that guy? Will there be that guy? Is it going to be Rodgers in Pittsburgh? That would be kind of insane. Or is it going to be somebody that we're not even thinking about? I don't know. I think the NFL season is obviously only a week away, and I'm only getting more excited for it. So let me know what you guys think is going to happen. Who is your favorite team? And I will see y'all next time. Appreciate y'all watching. This has been Breaker Sports, and I'll catch y'all next time.